Also, thanks, Lungelo. Got it. Between Charlie Khalid, Luzuka, and Lungelo, did you guys attend last week's, not last week, the last session 2 weeks ago?
Oh, no,
Yes,
I
sir,
missed
we
it.
did, sir.
I missed it. I had work at 4 that I couldn't move it.
Yes,
so
Lungelo, yeah. I remember you messaged me, you emailed me about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I really wanted to had done that, and you said there wasn't a recording, right?
No, there wasn't a recording. Fortunately, the stream got corrupted, but it's fine. I think we're going to probably have another kind of session detailing funding organizations in the future. But
Okay.
I mean, I know that I asked you if you have any questions. I mean, I think we have about 2 or 3 minutes. Is there a specific question that you wanted to ask about funding through government?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest struggles I'm writing right now, but my short film that I'm trying to push, or the script, they want a KZN and now the NFVF, they want some kind of letter of distribution and letter of financiers. And usually I'm used to that for feature films, but I know I got rejected by both organizations. Well, the first one, KZN said, you didn't submit a letter of one of distribution plan, and then one of the finance plan. And I've applied to them before and got grant money, and I ignored that because usually that's for feature films. But now it seems to be a thing for short films, and I'm like, when did they make this upgrade? But then also, I'm still gonna engage with them on the issue, but I'm like, how am I supposed to find? There's no financing for a short film unless you have it, but it's not uncommon to not have money. That's why you're applying, right? You apply to the institutions because you're trying to make a film. And, so it's just been that. Those were my 2 questions that I need to figure out with them, because I'm like, last year or 2 years ago, last time I applied 2-3 years ago, it wasn't an issue. But now they're like, you didn't submit everything. That's a problem. And in my head, I'm like, it's a short film.
Right. So if I understand correctly, you submitted for development, not production.
No, this was for production.
Right. Look, I mean, the reality is all funding organizations around South Africa have requested now that, especially if you're going to production, whether it's a feature film or a short film, that you do have a distribution plan, if not a letter of distribution from Indigenous or anything like that, that you have an idea of how you want to distribute it. I think that the NFVF in particular is quite fair with regards to short forms, where they say, look, you may not have a distribution intent letter from Indigenous, AAA, and so forth, but at least ensure that you have a very good distribution plan, which speaks of you're going to festivals, you're going to this, and then you're going to seek out licensing with Showmax or something like that. So as long that's one aspect, and then you mentioned a financing letter. Do you mean a financing? I mean, are you seeking additional funding outside of your KZN Film Commission and NFVF for your film? Is your budget that big?
No, I'm not seeking additional financing because I don't know how to do that. And I would think that if I got financing for the short right now, I think it was like 4.5 million. So no. How much is it? 400.
It should be 450,000, right?
Yeah, 450,000. Yeah,
right.
Sorry.
So they generally, what happens is that if you can have a financing plan with a budget that accounts for that 450,000 rand, because if KZN is going to be financing it entirely, then you have to prove that you're going to be using that money in a way that's conducive to budget for production. So you have a financing plan, and you can have, it's very easy. You can just have 100% of financing coming from KZN Film Commission, or 50% and then another 50% from NFVF. But you have to produce a financing plan, and you have to produce a budget that accounts for that financing plan. And also milestones is how you're going to be utilizing that funding in a schedule.
At what point? Yeah. Okay, I mean, so I've got a schedule, I've got a budget, then what you're telling me now is new info to me, but I mean, granted, I'm a writer, director, not much of a producer.
Now you're a producer. You got no choice because you decided to make a short film. So
no, that's true. That's right. Yeah.
Financing
so I didn't know the template. That's the thing. I didn't know the templates.
Right.
I don't know that information. I just saw all of a sudden, oh, they want this. I was like, I didn't submit the last time. And I was like, no, we want some. So I need to know what the template is, because what you're saying makes sense to me, but I just always thought it wasn't a big deal. So if there's any templates or any way you can refer me to have this information, because we did submit a budget, obviously, and a timeline of when, would be in, shooting, how many weeks, etc., etc. It was a 7-day shoot, but it's fine. Maybe I'll email you offline after this. I know I'm taking up time.
I'll be honest with you, it's just a table. It's a table that breaks down the total finance that you need, and then above that total is which source, how much percentage, what does that physical money look like? So it's the source, the money, and the percentage of the project that is the total. The percentage of the project that's coming from KZN, from commission, or NFV. If you need like a super budget, I think Studio Binder has something like that. But it's literally just a table that just explains where you're going to be getting what money from and how much does that account for percentage-wise for the entire project.
Okay, because I've seen that in their paperwork.
It is that simple. Believe me on that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. No, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
No problem. Sorry, Gavin, I know we spoke quite a bit in the beginning for it, but I think if you're happy to, we can get started, unless you want to wait for another couple of minutes.
No, let's begin.
Okay, thank you everyone that's come through today. I see quite a few people have come through. I think some people I have not seen before, which is, it's always great. So thank you very much for coming through. So today is unlike the other days, which the past 2 or 3 sessions, which have been very much big production and big, I would say, distribution questions. We're going to come back to the very nature of storytelling, and also why sometimes storytelling, your particular brand, the voice that you want to put forward and the story that you want to put forward may take you a bit longer as a writer than a conventional story which follows a Hollywood structure or a very much a plot structure that's been seen from even the Greek times. So we're of course calling it the untold story, as well as the unique voices, the original voice that accompanies that. So obviously Gavin joining me today, Gavin will be talking a lot more about it than I will. I have a very limited view of it, but I think Gavin, with his extensive experience in working with many different writers, will be able to speak definitely to this notion of having an original voice and how that yields to stories that have not actually been seen before, even though the plot elements may be similar to other films that you've seen from other countries, and how as South Africans, that is probably our biggest selling point. So from my side, at least, it's an idea that we have a very diverse country. And with that very diverse country, there are so many stories that we're just not tapping into. Stories that we think are, I would say, boring, too real life, too close to home, but are actually very exciting stories. Very, very unconventional stories that have a very particular rhythm to it that speaks to the rhythm in which we have in South Africa. Now, unfortunately and fortunately, there is I would say, a global standard to storytelling that exists, and especially in film. The idea that there is a beginning, a middle, and an end is ubiquitous across most films. It takes a very special kind of film to break that and have it not met. If you think of and I'll use a very contemporary example, Pulp Fiction, Quentin Tarantino. It is very much, it is a middle, beginning, end, and then going back to the beginning kind of story. But it also is a very unique voice that is paired with that makes it a competent story, that makes it very compelling to watch, irrespective of the structure and the plot, and it just being a weird, unique thing. Now, we should be focusing on that in South Africa, where we are informed by the stories we get from America and Europe, but really, we should be developing our own voice. If you think of the Koreans, for example, the Hong Kong filmmakers, the Japanese filmmakers, the Senegalese filmmakers, and the Nigerian filmmakers, they have very, very, very unique stories that are very indigenous to their countries. I think we've all seen Nollywood films, and we always have like a cringe factor to it. But reality is those stories are so unique to Nigerians that they go actively support it in buying tickets. They go actively support it in buying DVDs, and it's like a status symbol for them. So why is it that Nigeria is embracing their unique, weird way of telling stories and is actually pushing it and elevating it to the point where they're getting recognized by the Academy for their unique storytelling? I think that it's a truth and an earnestness and an honesty towards portraying stories that speak to them, that speak to the individual writers as well. And I think the biggest problem we have in essay, of course, is if you want to take the traditional structures for financing writing, it's very much either it's in the broadcaster or it's through traditional financing through a public institution. And that only lends itself to having a certain amount of voices because they have to meet a very defined story format for their audiences and a very defined story format for international sales, because there is a stereotype view of what South African films are. And so long as that's the stereotype and we're not meeting it with different kinds of films, that is what we're going to be coming up against as the thing they want, because they believe that's, you know, what South Africans can produce. So before I hand over to Gavin, I'll give you some concrete examples of that. So we all know that South African stories are dominated by the gangster story, the taxi driver story, the woman dying of AIDS story, these, and also the rugby story, the Afrikaans was a Reiki story. We have very, very, very good forms. But unfortunately, because those are the only films that are out there, they lend themselves to being the only South African stories that we know of. So the struggle hero story, etc., etc. We haven't seen really the story of the informal trader lady who has to somehow make ends meet. Also, her son is going to not make it to school. Is not going to make it to university. There was one film I saw called Maximona, which was a young guy just trying to go to university and becomes a funeral mourner to pay for his way. And it was a beautiful story. It was a funny story. But it's a unique story, which took a very long time to get made. And in between the film being made and the beginning of that writer's journey, a lot of things can happen. And unfortunately, that writer-director is no longer making films. So on the back of that, I'd like Gavin to speak a bit more of the topic. And I also think that this is a great platform for people to talk about where they feel their voices could finally be expressed in unique stories and what struggles they've been having. And we'll have that in the second session, of course. Sorry, Gavin.
Cool, thank you. And because we have some new faces here, just a heads up that this is a discussion group. So if you are able and willing to put on your camera, it's always nice to see people and gives us a chance to sort of connect and know who's there a little bit more. This is divided into two sections. So Tobias and I are going to talk for a bit and then we'll open it up for other insights. So from my side, coming to a place of creating original stories has been with me from a young age as a calling and as something I've been curious about, because from a young age I understood that we kind of need new stories, that essentially we are as beings, story beings, and like we live out the stories that we tell ourselves. And if human consciousness is to change, our stories have to change. And those two things are obviously also very interlinked. So I'm not going to concern myself with getting these things made. I'm just going to speak as a writer trying to make them, what that is and what that journey is like. And, as writers, we can only basically express ourselves. That's always, we have our own consciousness and that we can never get away from. Whatever we are going to create will resemble ourselves and where we're at the moment that we make it. So I always tell people that your life is the work of art, and any particular piece you create is just the instantiation in that moment you created. So basically, to write differently, to write stories that haven't been seen before, you in a sense have to live a story that hasn't been seen before or lived before. And because human life is very archetypal and very similar cross-culturally, it's very hard to live something that hasn't been lived before. In essence, pretty much everything has been lived before. There are no real untold stories. Like, human life has been the same one way or another for 5,000 years. What makes a difference, the only thing I think that can make a difference, is the nature of your own consciousness and perception. It's, how do you see your myth? How do you see the greater myth of reality and your place in it? When you bring insight to the characters around you, to the scenes, to the places where you are not, can you bring depth? Can you see truth beyond yourself? We have nothing, when we look at a scene that is shallow, we don't, it's not going to take us anywhere, but you're not going to be able to write one that is different and deep if you can't see it differently and be different. And being different is not something that is prized in human society. Like, we like some difference, a little bit of, especially if you're in the arts or something, some difference, some eccentricity is okay. But generally, because we are socialized and social animals, we are encouraged to stay within some boundary of social normality and conformity. So, whatever it is that's going on, there's certain okay perspectives and okay ideas that you can have within a small range, but a lot of the options aren't really on the table. It doesn't matter what you're relating to. I mean, COVID's a fantastic example because it's polarized us so much. And there's very strong narratives about what it should be. And anyone out that is like basically in the process of being ostracized. But it's always something like that. It doesn't matter what period of history you're in or where you live. There's always something that says, this is the proper way to be. And then if you want to be truly original, if you want to be truly yourself, you do have to step outside of social boundaries and just discover, what you are if you're not that thing that you're told to be, which you're told from the time you're a child. And from the time we were a child, that original voice, that original essence, that spark of who we really are, is in some ways beaten out of us, like slowly or quickly, depending on your upbringing. And maintaining that is very different and very difficult. So for me, I'm going to have a sharing. Like, there's a lot of things that I would not say to a group of people who aren't in film, because in some ways, everyone here has already made that leap to do something different. Like, if you're going to step into film, you kind of have to go, I don't know how is it going to work out, or, what it is, but I'm following my heart, I'm following my passion. I'm just going to see, I trust that it'll somehow work out. And it's a big leap. Very few people have the courage to make that leap and to step into something that almost everyone around them at the time they make that will go is impossible, or, why would you choose that? And for me, essentially, my confession is that I'm a complete weirdo. Like, I really am, from the time I was a kid, like, very different to most of the people around me. And I could say in just how many ways, but that gap's only widened over the years. So I did also, because in order to see this world differently, you have to have a different understanding. I basically hermited and read books and watched movies and listened to music and researched the world for like 30 years and had very little outside life. So very little I mean, that's not entirely true. In fact, it's actually the opposite, because I did actually live very full on, but my variety of experience wasn't massive. So I didn't really have a proper relationship until I was 35. And then I had met an amazing woman. It was fantastic, but I didn't give it that time before. I didn't have that space before. And if I can't, and in some ways I was kind of cursed when it came to relationships, just because of many things where I don't fit into normal social expectations. And if women are filtering, many would filter me out pretty quickly based on not knowing me. But when the right woman did come along, then I was able to really understand relationships from a deep place. She was a very deep woman, very beautiful, very smart. And that experience allowed me to write relationships and women in a way that I wouldn't have been able to before. We just have to have certain life experiences if we're going to write them truthfully. It's just impossible otherwise. So at the same time, I also did many things to sort of step out the boundary of conventional thinking. Like many of my heroes growing up, from Bob Dylan to Hunter S. Thompson to Aristotle, all loved psychedelics, all wrote very highly of it as something to improve yourself. I went on a huge shamanic journey. I've taken more ayahuasca and iboga and things than most people would imagine even possible. I've spent years with it, and because it has totally transformed my consciousness, my body, and my understanding of how reality operates. And I went there very particularly to ask those questions, to test the boundaries of what reality is. And that thing of growth, basic human growth, is the core really of our art, because the basic archetypal stories that we're all familiar with are kind of the journeys most people live through. We see these genres over and over because they're lessons we live over and over, and it's there to remind us how reality operates. But the only way to get to a place where you're telling new stories is to outgrow the stories that have been told, and to tell, or just to approach it differently. To be able to approach it differently does require, again, some degree of being willing to just be different. And it is hard. Conformity is basically a field that we all live in. Every time we step into a role. So that's where I started, like I'm confessing things that I would not normally speak if I'm in the role of, say, teacher in this instance. Like I'm Zooming, sharing information. And normally I would stay in a very mind place, and I can speak to, these are the principles, yada, yada. But to drop the mask and speak from our heart is very vulnerable. I don't know any of you really. Tabisa, I've got to know a little bit, but I don't know any of you. And, judgment around various things like behaviors like serving iboga or taking lots of iboga are very out there. Like I don't tell people I do that unless I meet them in a certain context where I know that they're already like kind of okay with that. So to tell a story, to tell a story from our heart that's my own experience is immediately different. So if I'm telling the one, if I get the opportunity, the one I've put a lot of heart into is the healer's journey. It's the story of a healer who kind of realizes that reality is very different to what he's conditioned to accept, sees behind the veil, and goes on a journey to embody a new way of being. And that's been my own journey. So I can write that story, and I can write it with insight and depth. But how many people will meet that story from an open-hearted place? It's been interesting to see, because some people are completely triggered by it. We've had basically our reviews either go like completely low or really high, because basic worldview is a trigger. And if people disagree with the potential that this is a spiritual reality, for instance, I dismiss that film just off the bat and get really angry about it. I think, oh, all this like hippie shit. So yeah, for me, the only way to original stories is by living your own authenticity, because we actually are all absolutely infinitely unique. And the only way we're not unique is by allowing ourselves to be conditioned and socialized. And those things aren't mutually exclusive. It's just that the way our society operates is very invested in trying to ensure conformity from a young age. That said, Untold Stories is a slightly different thing. It's really related because, we've already spoken about genre people like Tarantino who bring an original voice to a well-told story, a story we've seen many times. Nothing Tarantino's ever made in terms of actual story is remotely unique. It's just his perspective on it and his style and his character that makes it more unique than most. But there's many stories that I think we live that because we don't see it reflected, like we don't believe we can tell. So there is like a consensus paradigm about what reality is. So if I want to talk about other dimensions or the fact that we are not physical, really, then already I'm against the grain. Not that that hasn't been said by many people across many places, across all of time, but there is a consensus for what we accept. And mostly it's unspoken because in certain circles, there's nothing controversial in that. But if one were to try and put it into mainstream media, there's a strict materialism and kind of paradigm that is there, and that you basically were up against, and that you kind of have to grab attention and bring believability into before it's received. Whereas if you just send a romantic comedy down the line, there's nothing to challenge anyone in that.
Gavin, I just wanted to actually ask a quick question about that, because I think you raised a really important question, and that is, as a storyteller, especially one who is going to be telling unique stories, you're going to have a worldview, and that worldview is maybe perhaps particular to who you are. I mean, you just mentioned right now what is a very strong worldview for you, but that the full expression of it is going against the grain. It's not going to be as you mentioned, mainstream. And I think that that's a really important point for a lot of people to listen to, especially if you've written some stuff and you're trying to break out of the common stuff everyone is trying to make, and you really are questioning yourself, what is a unique story for me? I mean, what you just mentioned right now, I would probably make a very fascinating, I won't say alt genre story, but it would be definitely your film. It would be definitely your story, your expression, which I think a lot of people here should really come to understand that may be something that you're quite, I won't say embarrassed, but shy and maybe a bit too astonishing to express publicly. But the wonder of having a screenplay that's blank in front of you, at least the screenplay software, is that you can tell any kind of story, and a story that means something to you. And knowing full well that it may not be the most, I would say, conventional thing to say to people in public, but you have this platform for creating something that speaks to you and speaks to limited amounts of people. What do you think about something like that? Do you reckon that's a concept that sort of speaks to what you mean?
Sorry, just clarify that.
So with regards to this unique voice and this original storytelling that you need to have as a result of having a unique voice, you're going to be expressing things that you might not normally say to people that you don't know. But for some reason, as a storyteller, there's this relationship you have with the viewer that says, well, if you paid for the tickets, I'm sure you want to watch this film. So I'm going to go the full way with telling this story.
Yeah, look, sorry, I don't know if I'm going to be answering, but I guess I'm speaking more to your general comment than the particular question, because I'm still not entirely clear. But look, very few people make their worldviews their own. And, mostly it's inherited and taught. We very rarely have time to sit and investigate the history we've been told, or the way power operates, or, the history of politics or anything like that. Very few people are able to gather that time to just do it themselves. And then, yes, if you're going to put in a story, there's a vulnerability to that. It's a very vulnerable thing. It's naked. And we do live in an hierarchical power structure where people have been killed for speaking truth to power for time immemorial. It's the kind of the way it is. And, for me, I even experienced that, sitting in my body, that fear of what will happen if someone sees this, what will happen if I try to put this into the world, and literally feeling the resistance in my body. And I did for years. And it was something I also had to work on spiritually, because I have had experiences of past lives, and I did know that came from persecution and execution. I had to actually get that out of my system. But it's a very, just to say that again, like, I have experienced past lives. I have memories and flashes from it that came back to me, over the last 7 years, I guess. I've had very brief glimpses, but I've felt it. I've felt myself in another place, because they're not really past, they're parallel, kind of occurring everywhere. And to try and get these ideas into stories, to make it believable and whatever, and entertaining, is the challenge, because obviously it has to entertain. And right. Fiction, and fantasy and sci-fi, I mean, fantasy particularly is the label that we put on stories like this. And the very genre name bugs me, because it's not a fantasy. It's just lived experience for many people, but it's outside the box. But that would be the genre that it would get labeled into. So it's very vulnerable. It's and it's that sort of thing, or just your experience with a lover or something. We very rarely see truthful sex scenes in movies. We don't see truthful journeys around sex in movies. To be intimate and truthful about vulnerable aspects of life is not easy. And maybe I should just leave it there, because I'm definitely now repeating and ranting.
No. It's. I mean, what you're speaking to really is this idea that you're going to be putting something. I mean, I get what you're saying about the whole. If you believe in past lives and you make a film about that, immediately it gets put into fantasy, sci-fi, when it isn't your intention. It's something I think every writer, if they have a unique experience, say for example, they grew up in a family of 5. And they come from a Asian or Middle Eastern or African background, and they want to write a story about that. They want to write a story about what it was like growing up in this family, and there's a moral attached to that. Immediately, that film is going to be attached with the genre of family drama. or African drama or Middle Eastern drama or Asian drama. But meanwhile, it's just a truthful expression of who they are. It's a truthful expression of their own experiences. And I think what you're saying is, if you want to have a unique voice, a unique story, and an original voice, you have to accept that other people are going to call it something. But so long as you tell the truth story that you want, without any preconceived notions of genre, then that leads itself to having your voice coming through, your interest, your story being presented in the best possible way. Afterwards, when you're dealing with the producing side of it, or when you're dealing with trying to sell it to people, yes, that's when the door is open, and now you're talking about genre, you're talking about those things. But you have to allow yourself the space to be weird, and comfortably so. You have to allow yourself the space of, for the story's sake, I need to speak honestly. I need to speak with truth. I need to speak with something
Right.
that really reflects me pushing myself to tell this story. I can speak to that for myself. I mean, the stories that I've written, I have no idea where the hell they come from. I've never seen them before, and it's because I have like obsessions about an idea, which leads to a story expression. Now, there's another filmmaker. I know I mentioned Tarantino, but forget Tarantino. Tarantino is probably a modern example, but there is a filmmaker called his name is Robert Bresson. He's an
Oh,
old French filmmaker. He actually basically jump started the French New Wave. His stories, you watch any one of them, they're about an idea that he was obsessed by, and he made a film about it. And if that doesn't sell you on it, it's literally some of the most beautiful and simple storytelling. But because he's so uniquely obsessed over his own weirdness and his own obsession over ideas, he finds the best possible way to tell that story. And it leads to such an honest storytelling form that it led to an entire movement of original storytellers, of people who want to authentically speak to their own experiences. I mean, he was coming from the French side. So he had just come out of World War II. He was experiencing something that was almost spiritual, something that was almost and akin to him speaking to a higher power. But he ended up being atheist, as probably as an exploration of this thing. So it's because he allowed himself to have that weirdness, to allow himself to really fight for that original story and that unique voice. And he found himself being comfortable with it, even though it wasn't mainstream, even though it wasn't going to sell in the theaters, it wasn't going to be financed for at his equivalent of 7 million rand per film, etc., etc. He still trusted his own voice and found expression through that. And I think, Gavin, from what you're saying really is that embracing of the weirdness, embracing of that inner voice, and being comfortable with expressing the story that's really within your heart and within your mind. That's something that you should have as the guiding light for your storytelling, not necessarily following archetypes from Hero with a Thousand Faces, or anything by written in story by Robert McKee, or even Save the Cat, but really focusing on that thing that yearns for you to tell a story. Learn the rules, but break them by telling your own story. I don't know. It's a general comment. It's not.
Yeah, no, I hear that, and I guess I just want to bring it back to the fact that that's hard to do in terms of if you're going to put yourself out there, as writer that your mom's going to see this, your wife's going to see this, your brother's going to, that you have to be okay with putting it out there and being seen by all those people who perhaps you would struggle to put yourself out there if they were standing, in front of you, if they were standing in front of you. So it's that thing of being willing to be different, and not to be different for the sake of being different, but just in your own authenticity. And that's really not easy. It's really not easy. I'm right that love scene that was based on the real thing, that woman or that man is going to see it. And then a lot of people aren't comfortable with their own truth also being told. Like if you go through something with someone and you share it with someone else, lots of times people are like, how could you tell them that? How could you tell that story? How could you just be truthful about what happened? Like, there's a lot of shame often involved in revealing the full layers of truth, lots of self-judgment, lots of, all these things. And until I think as writers that we can get through that, then I don't think our own original voice will come through. But genre and everything, it's different. It's what do you want to tell? if you don't want to tell, deep truths about yourself, there's nothing wrong with that. And if you don't want to tell deep truths about the way the world is, nothing wrong with that. There's a market for that. But if you're trying to distinguish yourself, and in the film world and in the art world, there's very few people who get to really make money and stand out from the thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are doing the thing. And particularly for us standing in South Africa, like, how do we actually reach out and distinguish ourselves on a global stage, where we have, we're working with less resources, we have potentially a very unique reality that's not being seen. It's not necessarily my reality. I'm a white dude, middle-aged, who's lives a not too dissimilar life to many people in the States or somewhere else, in some ways, in most ways, but in other ways not. But finding your own uniqueness is also quite hard, because we see ourselves in relationship with this, and we see ourselves through the eyes of others, and we see ourselves through the eyes of culture. And getting a clear view in yourself can actually be very challenging, also depending how you're wired. Some people are much more firm in themselves, and some people really do need to have it mirrored back completely, or they won't see it. People are also very different in those ways. So yeah, it is a challenge, I think, to find and own your own authenticity. And I think that's at the root of why there's so much imitation, so much conformity, and so few examples of truly original work, because it is, I think, very, very hard.
It also does lend itself to the idea that it's very much experience-based. You have to have lived, or rather you are trying to live a very, I would say, not conventional life in order to have some kind of story to talk about. I can imagine how difficult it is, because I did come from that background where I was in a rat race the whole time. And then to jump into telling unique stories was a very difficult thing, was a very unique challenge. What I had to do was to go back into my family, go back into my history, and see if there was a story that I experienced maybe when I was a kid. And that was a fundamental story which had not been seen before. And what led to the short film, which was made with the NFF. And I think from there, that's where I tap into it. There's an obsession that I will have about something. And it's something that I know I'd probably be too embarrassed to talk about in public. But I'm going to do the best possible thing and make a film about that and be forced to talk about it in public. But I wanted to actually ask you a question with regards to the unique voice. So you mentioned something that's really important. Sometimes if you're making a film or you're on a series in which you are not going to have necessarily the most the most latitude to tell a unique story, and you have to obey conventions of storytelling. You're writing for a broadcaster, or you're writing a film for a Netflix original or something, and they want very defined beats. They want very defined story. How do you find your own way of fitting in your voice? Is it possible, or is it something that you have to say, okay, maybe not for this project, but the experience that I'll get from doing this project will help me better inform what isn't my unique voice? I don't know if there's something you can add to that.
Yeah, no, I think that is the case, because essentially, I mean, a lot about the uniqueness does come from the story idea. If it's not your story idea, then you say you're doing a straight romantic comedy heist film or something, it is hard it certainly won't be an untold story. But you can bring some original voice to it, but it really will just be, again, that self-expression thing where if you write a scene, your understanding of who would say what, when, why, comes to the fore. And your own sense of humor, some moments, and some people you can work within range, and you can still kind of express yourself while doing someone else's story, and some people you can't. Some your basic voice is just incompatible with what they want, and you just can't. You'll never the twain shall meet, is the but also support other people in their own storytelling. So I've edited and rewritten scripts by different writers, and as you do that, you even trying to respect their scene, you're respecting their characters, you're not changing much, and one can do that by just following the work. Here's a scene, once what gets in the way, what's the resolution, is it doing what it needs to do? It's as strong as it can be, and you go through those things on a very technical level. And in the end, you'll still be, you have to apply your own decision making. You can't get away from your own voice. I think this is also my basic point. It's all just self-expression. So even when you do that, when it's as defined as possible, when your choices are constrained as possible, still some element of yourself will come through. story itself is a collective creation. So it'll be the combined voice of all the people who are determining what goes onto that page. And in film, obviously, then you also have to really learn to play together, because it can't always be your voice and can't always be your choice. You do have to just go, well, this is the voice of the team. And that's totally okay. And if you've got a nice team and can play within it, then that's awesome. And if not, it's going to be challenging.
Yeah, I completely get that. Steve McQueen, one of my favorite filmmakers, is a writer in his own right, but he generally doesn't write, solely write his work. I don't think he ever really has. He always co-writes it. And I think there's an element of him understanding that, so long as he's provided the right vision, the right guiding principle for that story, he's able to share the responsibility of crafting the story with another person who really is meeting that same level of storytelling with him. It's not, it's not a case that he's dragging someone along with him. This is someone who's in that partnership. They're elevating each other. They're elevating the story and doing what's needed. I wanted to actually, I think you answered it. There was an idea that, how do you keep your voice in when you're working with a broadcaster, with Netflix? But I think you also answered an idea that if you're working with another writer, if it is a story you've come up together with, you've had the genesis of that story idea together, it's a much easier journey to co-write that story than it is you coming on board to help write another person's story, and the other person happens to be the main writer or even the producer on that project. So it's a case of that, do you bite back? You may have to bite back your opinion as to where the story is going and really just take the analytical mode and do what's needed to give that story the full latitude it needs to become a great film. Yeah. Am I wrong in stating that? Is that something that speaks to what you're mentioning?
Yeah, I think so.
Great. I actually think that I think it's a perfect opportunity to open up to the rest of the group to actually ask questions and speak to what we've spoken to of you. I know it's a very big idea. It's something that we're going to probably come back to weeks from now as well. And we'll come back to in topics coming from this, because this idea of creating an untold story that's possible because you've crafted an original voice is a very big idea, and it's actually something that is very experience-based as well. So I'm very keen to hear from the group as to what your experiences are, what your frustrations might be with that principle, and if you've come up against, a reader or a viewer who's so used to watching Transformers, and then they read your beautiful script, which is not Transformers, and then to get a crushing sense of feedback from that. How do you deal with that? I want to hear from your experiences. I will give you a carte blanche. I have to leave at 5, but of course, Gavin is going to lead the session for the questions and answers. And please, I would love to hear from you guys while I have the opportunity to, and I will be listening to the recording afterwards. So I'm going to open up the platform. Yes, Kate. Hi.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Gavin, thank you for sharing so honestly, and as always, Thomas, for all your insights as well. And it always feels like I'm listening to kindreds when I listen to the two of you speak, and you always have such insight and revelations that, So yeah, I was also always the weirdo outsider and never fitted in. And my mum would say to me, "Don't worry, when you're at art school one day, you'll fit in. You'll find your people." And then I went to art school and I didn't fit in either. And I was like either too conservative or too weird. And then but weird in a different way to how anybody else. Yes, I just didn't fit in. And then years ago, when I started seeing a psychologist, which I'll come back to, I said to her, I was like, I never fitted in. I had groups of friends, and I'm 50, so I was at university in the late 80s, early 90s, and there were very stated social groups in terms of signifying through clothing. Now when I go onto campus, people dress a lot alike. But anyway, they were very, very distinctive clothing, social sets. You could tell who was who by how they dressed. And I wanted to wear whatever I wanted to wear. And some days I'd dress in black, and sometimes I'd wear vintage, and sometimes I'd be arty and whatever. But most of the time, being an art student, you'd be in jeans, tackies, and a sweatshirt because you didn't want paint all over your clothes. But anyway, so I'm diverging. So she was like, so I was like, what's wrong with me? Why didn't I fit in? And she was like, there's nothing wrong with you. You just weren't prepared to cut off parts of yourself to fit in a box. And it was like, whoa, that was like the first time I ever thought of it like that, that there was nothing wrong with me. I just didn't want to conform to anybody else's version of me. So that helped me a lot. But so I've just sharing from my personal point of view, I've had cancer 3 times, and that has forced me out of life. And it has forced me into points of very deep introspection and reflection that I think most people, unless they've dealt with a serious illness, haven't been into. And that's further changed me. And I can't even remember who I was kind of in a way before all of that. And the last time I was diagnosed, I was told that I was now basically untreatable and outside of the bounds of health. So I had to go on a long, year-long journey of doing alternative medicine to heal myself. And one day it got to the point my journey where I went on to CBD oil, and it was fairly unknown at the time of how to use it. And I didn't respect the instructions. And I was told to start with like a micro dot, like a match head. And I took basically the equivalent of 2 rice grains worth. And I went on a shamanic trip. And basically for 4 hours was pinned to the bed and I couldn't move. And I was able to, Gavin, yeah, it was very, very interesting. I had a friend who used to take people on iboga sessions in order to heal them of heroin addiction. So I knew sort of about how to use a trip like that. And I hadn't been a drug user before because I didn't like that sense of losing control. So I hadn't been a dope smoker, or that sounded derogatory. I hadn't taken, I love red wine and I smoke cigarettes, but I tried grass and I didn't like the sense of losing control. So this time that control was completely taken away from me and I fell over the cliff. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to go for it. And I just listened to all the different voices and I started connecting with all the different interior voices. And I became aware of a super hypercritical interior voice that I've had to start befriending. But it was amazing. And to go through all that, and I have visuals and all the rest. So I'm not going to go more into that. Anyway, so I've discovered that I've started becoming very attracted to certain historical stories. And at first I wasn't sure why. And now, just yesterday, I looked back at these stories and both, they're 2 historical stories from 2 different periods of time, real life women, and they both had very strange illnesses. And I only sort of clicked about that. And they both became sort of incredible authors through this transformative journey of healing. And I was like, oh my word, I wasn't even really aware that that's maybe subconsciously or subliminally why I've been attracted to their stories. And they both became, well, the one was a major healer in the medieval era. And the other person is Catherine Cookson, whose books, are like sort of pulp fiction. But in herself, as a person, she's the most incredible person. Anyway, I'm wobbling on. But the point is I'm beginning to see what kind of stories I'm attracted to and the stories that I want to tell. And they're not the mainstream. So, yeah.
Thanks,
To
Kate.
know that there are other ones out there like me. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you. I appreciate it. And sorry to hear about all the stuff that you needed to go through in order to come to this point where you understand what stories you want to tell, what stories you love. And I think that's a unique journey for you. And I think I want to definitely see the films that you make, because I think that's going to be like completely fundamentally out there, very interesting, very intriguing films. And I think thank you so much for talking about, the journey for you to create your own unique voice. I think if you trust that, if you keep trusting that, something amazing is going to happen with that. I believe. I don't know, that it may be something that Gavin would like to speak to very quickly.
I wanted to just say one more thing, and that is thank you for providing this opportunity, because this is the first time I've spoken about this in an open forum, because I've always been so wary of sharing about the cancer journey because I don't want it to be the thing. And so when people say, why are you telling this story? Why are you? I never want to lead with that. So yeah, thank you. I've got to start practicing the why me to tell the story.
You should. I mean, you've got a powerful motivator now to tell those stories. That's incredible. That should be your thing. You fight for. That's incredible. You should be, when someone asks you why this, why you, why now? I mean, you've got the most powerful motivator. So trust it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say thank you for sharing. I really do appreciate it. It's beautiful to hear. And also wish you best of luck with that.
So, Robin, before we jump to you, I just wanted to answer some of the comments that we hear from early in the session. So, Nelson, Luc Besson's Leon is still my favorite. I love that film. It's a beautiful film. I've seen it when I was a kid. I watched it now recently as an adult. It is definitely what we're talking about, a unique film, unique voice. And look at the pressure under which he had to craft it. If that's not a sign of a great storyteller, I don't know what is, Kate, I see that you've seen Jan's films. It opened up my mind and stepped in. It was like a kindred spirit, and Guillermo del Toro as well. Del Toro is probably the best example of someone who embraces weirdness, his uniqueness, and now that has become the mainstream because of how he fought so hard for that to be expressed. He loves monsters. He grew up in monsters, things that bore other people. He was comfortable with. He found them to be the beautiful specters of his life, and as a result, him embracing it has led to a revolution in storytelling. And I think that's something we have to all embrace. You could be the one with your story that leads to a fundamental change in not only our society, but in the storytelling form itself. Be that unique addition to the global cinema and be truthful to yourself and fight for it. I think that's it. Robin, please jump in.
Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Robin. Can you guys hear me? Cool.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't have a question or anything really that I want to say other than I'm so happy I decided to join today. It's been on my calendar for a few weeks, and today I was just feeling so foggy and so stressed and so headachy, and I was just like, oh, I don't know if I have the energy. But I'm really happy that I joined, because you guys are just, like Kate said, also just like speaking my language, My story at the moment, I've never really had an issue with trying to find my stories, because it's like they bubble out of me. I have all the ideas, But the thing that I have been struggling with the story I'm working on at the moment, it is strange, and it is about freaks, and it's quite dark, and it's been the challenge of trying to balance and figure out how do I tell the story that my heart wants to tell, and just tell it authentically and just be myself, but at the same time there's always this niggling thing, if you want to make it as a screenwriter, especially in South Africa, of not really wanting to, but feeling the need to figure out your genre, for instance, or coming up with an idea and being like, oh damn, is that too dark? Yeah, but I've recently just realized that all of the stories that I've told over the years, and not just in screenwriting, but in story writing and everything, that the sort of theme that always comes back, and my main character is always a freak. Those are my stories. It's like Guillermo del Toro also is like, he writes stories about monsters. And more than that, it's about freaks finding their tribe. It's about freaks finding their people, their other freaks that they connect with. Yeah, I don't know if I made my point, but I don't really have a point, so I just wanted to share. Yeah. But thank you, everyone.
So Robin,
I-
yeah, Kevin, please go ahead.
No, Tabisa, you're going to go down. You go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to I wanted to speak quickly to what Robin you just said right now. You know, I think you might be the kind of storyteller where you need to just write it first, worry about the genre and the rewrite, and then worry about whether or not it's going to be too dark in the final edit. I think you should just write that story. Just make it right with the door closed. It's a Stephen King figurative metaphor. Right with the door closed, the first draft, open the door on the second draft, and then finally, when it's ready to be put out there, walk out the door with it. Don't worry about it being too dark. There are incredible films that have come out that are, in fact, very dark and very weird. In fact, Netflix has a series called Dark, and it's one of the strangest things I've ever seen. And that came from like weird, obsessive ideas that, yeah, I mean, I think you've seen it. So weird, obsessive ideas that came from those creators, and it became a phenomenon, right? So I would say, write the story you want to tell. First and foremost, write the story you think that you're waiting for, that you want someone else to make that story first. Write it down. Then, of course, from that point, it's now a race to get it done because people are going to start taking things away. But that's okay. The most important thing is that you've crafted that initial vision, and then you worry about making it fit here and there and so forth. Maybe it doesn't need to fit there. Maybe it's a case you have to find a producer who also wants to make weird stories, who also wants to make stories about people who don't fit in finding their own tribe. I think that is what you should be focusing on. And I mean that for everyone in the group, because obviously I have to go now, but I mean that as a parting message for everyone in the group. No matter what your story is, no matter what your background is, write that story first, because it's like the cure for HIV or something. We don't know if some kid in Africa is going to be born who's going to come up with a vaccine for it, because we're not giving that person the opportunity to become a doctor or a researcher. So treat your own storytelling like that. You could be the one to change the world with that story. So the story about a weird person finding their own tribe or creating their own tribe. Be that storyteller. Be the one who puts it out there. Because to be honest, that's what the story deserves. A guardian. And from my side, I have to jump now, but it's been an absolute pleasure listening to some of the stories that are here. I think that, guys, please keep talking. I'm going to be watching the recording of this, so I'm going to definitely have notes taken and so forth. And if you can, please leave your email in this this chat section. It's add your email if you haven't added your email, if you haven't given it to me before in the mailing list. I would love to listen to the stories that get told of you and then email you and talk to you about them. But I just want to say thank you very much for everyone coming through. Gavin, of course, will be handling the last 30 or so minutes. Questions, keep throwing them keep throwing it. And please ask any kind of question that involves your untold story and what you feel you need to have an original voice. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Tabisa.
Thanks, Tabisa. And I'm just going to jump off one of the last things that he said, because that really does kind of speak to where I wanted to go with responding to Robin's comment, which is just that stories need guardians. And there's this thing that I began this Zoom group with actually last year when we did a different iteration that I had in my heart. And that is the thing that storytelling is in every indigenous culture forever shamanic calling, and where stories come from, and why we should tell one story or another, and what impact that has on the tribe, I think is all somewhat magical and somewhat also important, more than we give it. Generally, we kind of look at stories as like something that's entertainment and a diversion, whereas I think a story is a spell. And the type of stories that we see are the type of the stories we live, that we're basically fabricating our realities together based on our mutual stories. And I kind of wonder, because I know it's my own experience, this is one reason I wanted to, kind of share with a whole bunch of other professionals, is that I was curious who else experiences storytelling as a calling, and who else experiences, the process as something quite magical. Thank you, Kate. And I did hear it in your story, and I hear it, also in our lives, because essentially we are living things, and as writers, there's quite a common pattern where writers have really challenging lives and they go through a lot. and it gives them the material to create from, but it can be very, very challenging, and also challenging to get to that place of actually doing the creating. But yeah, in my experience, the type of stories that come and the way they unfold, because they're often, when an idea comes, you never know where it's going. But there is a synchronicity and a timing to them, and they often come out of our unconscious longings and our unconscious fears and our unconscious things, are unconscious generally. But as we go, we can become very conscious about the sort of material that does come to us and where it's coming from and why. And Robin, yours sounds, very clear and interesting and unique, and I'm curious to see, what those stories look like, because the freaks coming together has been, I live in freak world, really. Like, mostly I'm surrounded by shamans and musicians and filmmakers, and I don't really step much into the day-to-day world anymore. I go to the shops, and then I come into experiences that most people aren't familiar with, and people that most people wouldn't believe are out there. You can do really amazing things. Anyway, so I'm hoping to coax a few more sharings like this if anyone else does have.
Yeah, I just wanted to add
Sure.
your comments about writing being a calling and creating stories being magic. I actually this weekend had quite a literal experience in that vein. And yeah, also really resonate with all of your hallucinogenic trips and digging deeper in that sort of sense. This past Saturday, I had some very coveted time to myself. And there's one of the characters in my story has been, and it's not the main character, I've got her figured out, but sort of the antagonist, the real underlying antagonist, has really been very tricky, very troublesome. I'm sure you all relate as writers, where there's that one character that you just can't put your finger on. And I decided, for the first time ever, it just sort of occurred to me, and I tried a very unique and unusual way of sort of figuring out this character and pinning her down. And what I did was tarot. I did a tarot reading for the character. And I'm novice in that. I'm a novice in those realms. But it was very interesting. And what I found interesting about it is that it's not just purely from the ether. It's not just this hocus pocus. There's this interplay between what I already know in my soul and in my heart about the character, and just the coming together of that muse or the ether or this, here I'm not expressing myself very well, but I think some of you at least get what I'm trying to say. It was amazing. It was really, really cool. I highly recommend it if you're into that type of thing. If you're struggling with the character, why not try tarot?
Thank you, Aaron. And yes, I agree. I mean, that's the whole principle, I guess, behind tarot, that, these are 78 archetypal images, and they represent the human journey. And if you pull at random looking for something, there is nothing that's random, and what will come up will be relevant and will speak to you. And I've been working with tarot for a long time, since I started to work with archetypes, because they're one of the best archetypal systems out there. And it does work. It's very interesting. Often I'll draw like one for this time, I'll call it, and just sit there. I'll draw like 5-6 cards from different decks and just leave it for a few weeks or a month or 2 months until I feel that it's there. But that message will keep playing out, and I'll check it over the days, and it will always correspond to things I'm going through. And partly that's because of the archetypal nature, where everything there is relevant to the human journey, and you could pick one up and find meaning in it. But there is a synchronicity that definitely plays out. And yeah, I would thoroughly recommend tarot as a storytelling tool. It really is quite amazing. Anyone else comments, questions, curiosities?
Hi, Nelson here. I was trying to figure out what you mentioned tarot until eventually I thought, oh, tarot as in tarot cards, but then that's just my pronunciation. The only experience I can actually give in terms of what I've been dealing with at the moment is taking a friend's script and having to write a whole entire pilot for an entire TV series that he's got as an idea. He's a filmmaker and from Los Angeles, he's now living in Cape Town, South Africa. And he's been toying with wanting to actually get something around. And one of the two challenges I figured out. Number one, it's an ensemble piece of a lot of different characters that feature a lot of flashbacks. So I've written for quite a while, and I realized that it's a new feature for me to be able to not only write someone else's work or rewrite someone else's work, but also actually figure out how they work on a flashback basis, because it's been very unique. I've never written that way. And the second part is the challenge of taking what initially was a 24-minute and realizing the story that he had was so condensed that actually I said, you need to actually split this up. And so my next challenge is not only splitting it up, which then makes it 12 and 12, but then still conforming to a standard of an episodic format, which is more or less 24 minutes. I mean, heck, I still don't know what the actual amount of time is, but then extending that person's own ideas and that all those set pieces to actually give it more life. Because I looked at it and I thought, wow, I can really see these characters breathing a little bit more if they actually had more room to breathe. So those are just experiences I've been dealing with at the moment with regards to unique story that's currently someone else's at the same time. But it's a challenge for me to be able to learn and grow as a writer, because I want to be able to not only be good at my own stories, but also help others as well.
Yeah, it's a very helpful process in terms of mastering your craft when you start doing that with other people's stories. It's very, very helpful. And in terms of that, like synchronicity and surprisingness of that process, you know, like as soon as you start looking at someone else's work like that, and then you start going, I see what this needs, and you start shaping the story based on the needs of the work, and like, okay, yeah, it's too condensed, I'll have to break this up, and you start working it from that way. Then something surprising often does jump out from that story, and it unfolds and it starts to kind of come alive. And that's what I really enjoy about the process of certainly finishing my first draft and getting to start again, is because then suddenly with it there, you can see, oh God, there's all those things I didn't see. And now that I see the picture, you know, it suddenly starts to take shape, but you didn't really know until you start actually just working step by step. And yeah, so good luck with it. And it sounds like it will be an interesting one when you're done. Cool. Zuko, you're first. Do you want to jump in?
No, I also want to share part of the journey of mine in terms of the writing world. With me, so most of the ideas I'm working on now are ideas I used to have as a kid. So I would write them down because I used to go to library a lot. That's where I studied most about directing, about writing, because financially I could go anywhere because of the background I had. So my friend was library. I would study each and every day. I have like a pack of books at home where I wrote notes about what is directing, what is writing, what are the unique ways of writing. So I find that now, as I've worked in the industry over the last 10 years, most of the ideas and the scripts that I'm writing, they stuck with me since young age. And what's amazing is the fact that nothing has changed in terms of society and the stories that I had as a young boy. They still relate because of most of the stuff I used to see as a young boy. Most of them, they haven't changed that much. So I managed to shoot 3 films, independent films, and I feel also those stories are very unique because I have still yet to see them in the mainstream. And what's so hard is the fact that even if you do approach the mainstream with these ideas, the first thing that you're gonna get is who's gonna buy this? Because at the end of the day, as a funder, I don't wanna fund somebody and then the theaters are empty. So I always find that challenge of having to kick that door or that wall of having to have the unique ideas or the strange ideas that people are not used to in the mainstream. So I've got 3 now, and I've got an independent film also I just shot now. And if people don't mind, I can also send it via email. There's a link that I would send because I have it on YouTube. So I think the challenge at some point is you have these unique ideas, but what are the channels of you now having them? Because at some point people need to watch those movies. People need to have the content. And if the content is not there on the mainstream, then how do we cross the barrier? How do we make sure that we reach as many people as we can? Because you'll find that it's a small group that understands your stories. And when you have to add numbers into that, you find it difficult because people are not used to that type of storytelling. And how can we come together then as writers to make sure that it's not just us in these smaller groups? How do we reach the large majority of people? Because people are hungry for unique stories, but on the mainstream, you hardly have those kind of stories. Then I think it's part of it. It's our responsibilities as writers to come together, and session like this needs to be at a public platform where people are getting used to the thought of thinking that we have, which sometimes tend to be different. So I also want to put it on us in terms of the responsibilities that we have as writers. How can we make sure that we fight the battle? Because it's 20 years, 15 years, 30 years down the line, unique ideas are still not reaching to the mainstream. Only maybe 1 or 2 that will pop up, but not in majority. So I just wanted to add that.
Well, thank you, Lizuko. And I wish I had an answer for that one, because I think it is a problem that we all face. And personally, I've reached a very great place of frustration with it, because I haven't yet got my first film to screen. I've had 2 that have been doing the rounds for a few years, and the one's with a producer who's got open access to Hollywood. And I've had this film with big broadcasters on board twice, had yeses, and fell through negotiations once, and fell through when we couldn't raise matching funds in South Africa another time. And there does seem to be, and then actually the first film that I would have rewritten also would have been released in theatre last year when COVID hit, and then didn't. And I've got to a place where I'm also like quite disillusioned with the industry and with trying to get unique things through the system until perhaps I've established myself in some way, because it just does seem too hard. It does seem that there's not really a desire to tell different stories, or to tell stories that are truthful, or that are, against the common mainstream narrative. Certainly here in South Africa, our broadcasters lack the imagination, and trying to get through the noise overseas, and even when you can get through it, is it just seems that it's too market driven in terms of we have preset expectations of what we want and need, and anyone who's not supplying existing product is in a big queue of people who have different ideas, and don't get an opportunity to get them out there. And I know I can't remember the name of the book. I'll try to remember it, but there's a nice collection of stories by Hollywood screenwriters, and it stood out to me when I read it that one of them was mentioning that all his best stories don't get made, and that this is a common experience of screenwriters, that many times the best stories that they've written that sort of sits in the drawer. And I do think that if it is going to change, and I think then it needs to change the nature of the industry itself. I think we need to be able to go from creators to audience without going through broadcasters and producers. I think trying to come down to low budget things that we can just film ourselves as a way of getting out there first is necessary. All the big original voices in Hollywood, like the Coen brothers, the Kubricks, etc., started with like straight genre movies, became established, and then as they grew, were able to bring in more originality as they went, but that did prove themselves first with established product. So I'm kind of considering going to writing books now, just doing something where I can just get an outcome when I'm finished. It's very frustrating, this whole business dance and the trying to make things happen, when essentially also as an individual I've got very little power to do so at the moment, and I think that's what I really have to change. But thank you for sharing, Lizuko. Does anyone have something to add before we ask Gordon and Sani to jump in? Kate? No? Where are you pointing?
In the chat box, I wanted to know, Luzuka, where are you based?
I'm in Devon. I'm working in Devon.
Oh, okay. There is a thing called the Sunshine Cinema and Bertha Movie House, which also screen independent films. And then I'd also encourage you to look for fringe film festivals that don't have any submission costs to submit your films to them to get them screened, to be shown to South African, Pan-African and other audiences. And now with a lot of film festivals going online and screening online, you know, you'll get your work seen like that. Well done for making them.
Sani.
Greetings, everyone. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes.
Right. No, in fact, thinking or like to come back to this thing of the untold stories. I'm sure what happened to me when I was young is not only unique to me, possibly it must have happened to all of you. That we grew up being told stories about the cannibals, how the ordinary human beings will trick the cannibals and all of that stuff. Now I'm thinking that writing such a story during these times, would it be marketable or would it be considered as one of the untold stories? Because those stories were very good. How those giants were were tricking people and how the people were tricking those cannibals and all of those things. So I'm thinking, would it be during these days now be one of the untold stories, and also the fable stories, where you have the rabbit versus that doing this, and then I mean I can go on and on, but there were such stories which we were told whilst we were young, of the cannibals and how clever the rabbit was, or this type of an animal, how clever it was. Now, telling those stories now, making them into movies or short films or whatever, would it be considered as, or would it be viable, economically viable during these days?
Two different questions, and I think both, well, the latter much harder to answer, because I think, you know, those stories could be very viable because they've not really been seen, and depending how they're told and the model it's released with, you know, I think they are, as you say, beautiful stories, and they haven't been well covered. You know, a lot of the mythology and the stories that get passed on as folk tales are definitely in the untold stories category. You know, I think a lot of kind of the, like, I don't know how many people have read Credo Mutwa, but he's truly a master storyteller. I mean, his books in the English language, which isn't his first, are, I think, some of the great masterworks of the English language, but those old stories aren't his, and he's a custodian for them. And there's really amazing, amazing stories. And I think they would make incredible films, like really, really. And even in terms of the pattern, they don't conform to traditional Hollywood storytelling. And there's some incredibly strong things about that. Like, for instance, the characters sometimes are villains, antagonists, but then later on there'll be a new chapter in their life and they will suddenly be the hero, or vice versa as they change, which is just much more truthful to human behavior, where we're all kind of a bit of shadow and quite a bit of hero, and it's, you know, depending on what circumstance the one comes out or another. So I think that, yes, definitely those are potentially untold stories, because some might have been done in different forms, particularly in animation. I don't know what you're talking about with the rabbit. But yeah, viability, hard to tell. A lot of resistance, I think, to telling those sort of stories. But I think they're very worth telling and would be amazing stories.
Yeah, that's I think we've touched the point there of this animation, because I've just make the rough outline of some of those previous stories, but then I said maybe these stories would be better if they were animation. But then the problem is that I don't know anything about animation. So I was wondering if say, I've got a script which I would like it to be made in animation. Is there anyone whom I can present the script and say, now here is the script, like that question of a rabbit and all of that, or the elephants versus the rhinoceros. Is there anyone who could say, okay, let us have a look, let us create an animation out of this short film? Because right now, if you can recall the description of the cannibals, how they were described as the tall giants and what have you, it's hard to get such a character. But in animation, you can just create that kind of a person who would be seen as a giant, taller than any human beings, with big feet and all of that stuff. You see, now, is there anyone who can say, right, if you've got a script that you would wish it to be an animation, I'm willing to consider it to see what we can do. Is there anyone in this group, possibly?
Kate?
Hi, I'm Bonnie. So animation is, I also work in the animation world. Animation is very, very expensive. So so the first thing is that to say animation is very expensive. But secondly, you can also create, to do mainstream animation is expensive, but you can do animation through stop frame, through cutout, through all different experimental mediums. And if you have the story, and the story is not too long, try and keep them fairly short to begin with. There is a group on Facebook called Animation South Africa, in which there are lots of young animators and artists who don't yet have mature stories, but they've got technical skills. So what you could do is perhaps pitch the story, pitch a brief on Animation South Africa's Facebook page, and see if any young animators would like to collaborate with you, especially in using non-traditional, by non-traditional, I mean not using expensive 3D or labor-intensive 2D, but looking at experimental mediums. Like there is a Natasha, what's her surname? And she does amazing work, which goes on to international film fairs and wins all sorts of awards. And she does it with ash and soot and charcoal and sand, and so you don't have to. If I'm not saying you, because you're saying that you're not coming from the artistic side, but you can work with an animator who doesn't have to work in traditional animation to create your story. So there are ways of doing it. If you're wanting to see your animation on a mainstream circuit, though, that's a much more difficult, long, and expensive process. But then a whole lot of animators have just recently partnered with Netflix, and they're creating their 10 stories, and they're creating an anthology of stories like Sex, Love and Robots on Netflix. They've come up with an anthology of African animated stories that they're going to be releasing towards the end of next year on Netflix, and it's very exciting. The stories look fantastic, the artwork looks fantastic, but that's very, very high budget, high end. And those artists have been in the animation stream for a long time.
Okay.
So I would start with the ASA platform on Facebook and see if you can get some animators to collaborate with you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Naomi van Niekerk is her name. It's just Google Naomi van Niekerk on YouTube to have a look at some of her animations and what she achieves with very low cost, labor intensive, but very low cost materials.
Great. No, I've got the name. Naomi van Niekerk, yes. No, okay, thank you, Kate. Sure.
Welcome. Good luck.
Thank you.
Cool. Anyone else before we close? Okay. Then yes, I just want to say thank you for joining, and thank you for allowing me to be quite vulnerable and open and reciprocating. I'm just going to look at the chats and see if there's anything Yeah, Triggerfish is one of our biggest ones. Mfonseni Nelson has put them out. They definitely, I mean, they are our biggest and most successful animation studio. And I think they are quite receptive actually, but I don't know how big they are on outside projects. There you go. Kate says no, they don't. Okay, so then if no one, then Gelo, please go for it.
Hi, sorry, really quickly. No, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for sharing today. And it's been very inspiring. And I think I just wanted to just say that it's very important to me, or very valuable, to be part of this group, because you sort of get to see and network and see where other writers are. I'm a director writer, to be honest. But I realized a few years ago that I must really commit to getting my writing chops up. And it's a very difficult journey, but I've been looking for a group like this, and maybe because of COVID now, online is the way to go. But even before COVID, it was just sort of hard to find spaces like this. So I just want to say thank you for the space, and thank you for today's session in particular. It's very inspiring and calming to know that, you know, it's hard for everybody. It's crazy for everybody. And sometimes you're sort of like, am I the only one who is getting no after no after no? But I'm like, I've got something here. It's nice to know that it's not just you, and to hear from other, you know, professional people, because I'm mostly teach by trade to pay the bills. And I'm independently doing my own stuff, trying to get independent films going, because just I need to pay the bills and whatever, everybody knows that. But just this industry is so disheartening sometimes. And it's really nice to know that, you know, it's not just me and other people are just sort of struggling, and it's kind of crazy. And, you know, one day I might make the leap completely into just being a filmmaker. But I'm like, I gotta make some kind of a project and have some kind of a calling card that is like a finished, hopefully feature, but maybe a few short films, just to be able to make the leap. But the industry in South Africa is just so cray that it's heartwarming, and it's still scary, but I'm comfortable being scared, knowing that it's not just me. So thank you very much, everybody.
Well, thank you for sharing, Lungela. I really appreciate that. And yeah, definitely not just you. It is unfortunately what we all have to deal with. I hope it changes as we go. Cool. If anyone else has one last thing before we go, otherwise I'm going to sign us off. Anyone? Okay, then I am going to just say thank you all so much for joining us, and hope to see you all again. And until the next one.
Thank you, Gavin. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, guys.